So today's task on this Nissan Leaf is to replace the driver's seatbelt. The driver's and the passenger's seatbelt on these are actually sided. So if your car is right-hand drive, obviously everything would be on the other side of the car, but other than that, it's exactly the same job. So first thing is to remove this seat trim, which I've already loosened off, but it literally just pulls up. That's nice and easy. Then the B-pillar trim has to come off so that we can get to the seatbelt rail. Again, I've loosened it off already, but it literally just pulls away, so that's nice and easy. This one actually pulled up the trim that goes over the door sill here, but that's fine. So we've got a bolt here. There's a bolt inside there, and then this assembly is actually bolted on kind of underneath the seat. So the next job is to take the seat out. The seatbelt reel itself needs a 10mm socket in there and a 14 down the bottom. It does have an electrical connector on, but because it was triggered during the accident, I unplugged it to free it off so that we could still use it. As you can see, it works perfectly well, and on a quick pull the ratchet works too, so it's been perfectly safe. Have to take this top one off too. It means this plastic cover's got to come off first. So the height adjuster has a couple of little clips, one each side here, and then one at the top. When they're released, you can get just enough room to get to the bolt to be able to undo that and drop the top mount down. A word of warning, don't go pulling this off because there's springs and all sorts inside there and they're going to disappear down inside the B-pillar. So as there's not a lot of room, need to use a ratchet spanner on this one. Makes it very easy. Just got to undo the bolt. The bolt will stay in the top piece when it's all undone and just come out clean. The replacement belt already has all of this already attached to it. So there's just enough room to squeeze this out past the top plastic part without causing any further disruption, and then there'll be room to squeeze the new one in after. So I've taken the two bolts out of the belt reel. The belt reel itself, this one's been modified to make it work while waiting for the replacement parts, but it has a couple of retaining clips on it, and then there's a couple of lugs on the bottom mounting bracket which have to locate in holes on the belt reel. But once the two bolts are out, it just pulls away cleanly, and the reverse is going to be true for rebuilding. Just got to deal with this bottom bit now, which means taking the seat out. There's two bolts at the back of the seat, there's two at the front. I always start at the back so that once I've slid the seat back to do the front, then these runners aren't sticking out when it's time to take the seat out of the car. You can use either Torx or a regular hex socket on these. I prefer the hex socket because sometimes when they're very tight the Torx tools break. So regular socket, going to pop these two out, then I'm going to the front. So the front two bolts are still done up. Means we can slide the seat back to expose them, whip those out, and then we can remove the seat. But what I'm going to try first of all is loosening them off and then tipping the seat forward to see if there'll be enough room to get the pre-tensioner mechanism out without having to actually remove the seat. So here we go, I've loosened the front bolts off, tipped the seat up now, got a couple of blocks of wood to keep it tipped up, and I'm hoping this is going to give me the room to get to the pre-tensioner, which is secured in here underneath the carpet. So in here under the carpet we've got the connector for firing the pre-tensioner, and there's a couple of bolts on the mountings. I'll actually show you the replacement one because they're very hard to see, but I can get to them easily enough. This is the replacement belt assembly which hasn't been fired. This is the direction the bottom part would mount in the car, and you can see there's going to be a couple of bolts holding it in. Once I've got those out, I can slip the pre-tensioner out and swap them over. So here, without my big hands in the way, it's much easier to see. You can see there's one bolt in there, and there's the sensor wire for the pre-tensioner. Need to just get a pick in behind the black clip. The black clip actually comes out very easily, so it's as well to actually remove it. Not necessary, but sometimes it comes out when you undo it, and then the plug will just wiggle out with a bit of encouragement. Then I'm going to put the black clip straight back in because it goes in halfway, and then when we've changed the belt, the clip will hold the multi-plug in position once we're all finished. So there's the correct position for the clip. That's what I was aiming for when I went to pull it out with the pick, but as I say, sometimes they come clean out, then you can just pop it back in again, nice and easy. And finally, you can just see the bolt at the back. Neither of them particularly easy to get to, but I think with the ratchet, should be able to whip those out. So here's the first one, bit of a tight fit, but it was doable. Gonna go and do the front one now. There's not a whole lot of room for the front one either, but that's doable. I'll get that whipped out and then we can change the belt over. And there we go, that one's out. So I can slide the pre-tensioner out, bolt the new one in, and then refit the top section and the new reel. Here we go. I've lifted the old one out, slotted the new one back in. I've got the back bolt in position. I'm going to go and do the front bolt and the multi-plug, and then come back to tighten up the rear bolt. It's definitely a job for someone with smaller hands than I, but there's just enough room to get to it. I'm going to wind them in by hand as far as I can before using the ratchet, because there's not a huge amount of space to swing the ratchet. So I'm going to tighten this up. I'm going to multi-plug on here, then I'm going to refit the multi-plug on here, and then we're done. I'll show you as I go. So that's all done up with my trusty ratchet. Now I'm just going to put the multi-plug back. It literally just pushes into the receptacle. I have of course disconnected the battery beforehand, and then the black securing clip goes on. And here we are at the front section finished. Going to go and do up the back bolt and then move on upwards. So as with undoing it, the space is a bit tight, but there's enough room to get a ratchet headed spanner on there. And we're away. So now the pre-tensioner assembly is bolted back in and nice and tight. I'm just going to refit the plastic trim that goes over the factory hole in the carpet. That just slides down and clicks into place. And then it's time to realign the belt buckle. The important thing is to make sure the belt itself isn't twisted. So it's actually sometimes worth just bolting the top in loosely first to make sure you've got no twists in the system. But this will just drop in. I'll align the mounting holes and plates, and then I can put the bolts back in. So I'm putting the top mounting back to make sure the belt's nice and straight. Just going to do it up nice and tight with a ratchet, and I can push this protective cover back. By not pulling it off, it keeps the height adjustment available on the seatbelt. So that's nice and tight now, and then that just pushes back in, and the height adjustments failed, so I'll have to look at that too. I'm going to plug back in the wiring multi-plug the same as on the pre-tensioner, and then when it's plugged back in, I'll press the black clip home. Do that before refitting the belt reel, because it's almost impossible once the reel's in place. There we go, all clipped back in place. Now I'm going to just line the reel up on its mounting slots and put the bolts back in. So the top hook's on first. Once that's hooked on, the bottom will just drop over these two tabs, and then the bolts will follow in nicely. Okay, so that's all bolted up nice and tight. Belt's working as expected. So I'm going to take my support blocks out, bolt the seat back down, and then I'll come and have a look at this height adjuster mechanism and find out what's stopping it from going back up today. Okay, so seat belt adjuster is sorted again. That's back up to full height. Now we can refit this B-pillar trim and the two floor trims. It's basically all done. I'll need to reset fault codes afterwards, but because the crash sensor that's in the center console there has recorded these faults, that's either going to need to be reset or another unit's going to have to be put in and probably programmed as well. B-pillar trims just clip back on with these clips, making sure all the wiring and everything's tucked away neatly behind it. Once that's all clipped in place, just need to make sure the rubbers are pulled up over the B-pillar trim, and then the floor trims can go back in. Okay, so the B-pillar trim is pushed back in. The trim around the bottom of the seat belt just lines up with its 4 spikes and pushes back in. That's all nice and secure. And then with these door trims, the plastic tabs that you see need to line up with the clips that are down here, but it all just pushes back into place. And there we have it. All the trims back in place, front and rear, push back in, job done, ready for the other side. The other side's actually going to be a lot easier because it doesn't have the pre-tensioner, although I do still have to lift the seat up to get to the mountings for the seatbelt. Mountings for the other side are exactly the same, it just doesn't have that big white pre-tensioner on it, but we've still got to get underneath to be able to get to these 2 bolts that are hidden underneath the seat, but it's relatively straightforward after the driver's one. Here comes the seatbelt change side 2. This one on this car, being left-hand drive, is on the right-hand side for the passenger, but clearly if you have a right-hand drive car, then this will apply to the left-hand side because it's a slightly different seatbelt unit without the pre-tensioner buried in underneath the seat, but the mountings are still underneath the seat, so we still have to lift the seat up and tip it up like in the other one, pull off all the trims, and then we're ready to go with the spanners. So first job is to remove the floor covering trim on the door here. These just lift up and pull up. There are usually 3 clips underneath them. Sometimes the clips come up with the plastic trim, as it has done here, and it's pulled up the rubber, but it's easy to take the plastic trim out of the metal clip. Same there, and then the metal clip can just be refitted where it belongs, and then the rubber trim can go back as well, but we need them up to be able to lift up the carpet and stuff. When dealing with these clips that hold the door to carpet trim in place, it's often beneficial just to check the alignment of these little tabs and give them a quick tweak with a pair of pliers just to make sure they clip on here in their relevant place nice and strongly. Sometimes it's not immediately obvious where exactly the clips go back. You can see there's a big long empty gap. Here it's very obvious because there's a gap the size of the clip, and the same here, but in the middle, not immediately obvious, but all you've got to do is line up the plastic trim. You can see where the tab is here, that has to clip onto, so the clip goes back in the same vicinity, and then all will be well when we're rebuilding. The procedure for doing the passenger side is very similar to the driver's side, so I'm not going to bore you with basically a repeat of all the details, but what I am going to show you is the side crash impact sensor, which is buried down in here. There we go. This is quite a common failure on the Leaf, on the right hand side as well for some reason. What I found is that if you search for the part by part number rather than by using Nissan Leaf, the part itself is very generic, and it's often way cheaper to buy the same part from a much more popular vehicle, and therefore obviously less cost for the parts. So the seatbelt height adjuster on this one has always been faulty since I bought the car used. It doesn't go up and down. The trick is that this pin needs to be pushed back, and you can see that inner pin moving there, and then that inner pin needs to locate properly inside the carrier here. I'll try and point it out to you. Inside these two, so you have to slot this down over the pin when you're rebuilding it to make sure that this release catch stays engaged when it's possible to release it afterwards. It's just, I thought I'd do it while I had everything off, nice and easy. Okay, so I've got the locating tabs inside lined up with the pins on the metal prong, and now when you squeeze it, it's possible to withdraw it, and therefore this seat operating mechanism, this top belt height adjuster mechanism is going to work properly again now when I rebuild it. It's very easy to pop this cover back on over the top when I'm all finished. I'm going to leave it off for the moment while I finish the rest of the work, because the top of the seat belt has to bolt in here. So looking at the replacement seat belt that I've sourced, this is the bracket that gave us so much trouble the other side because it's buried deep underneath the carpet. Because there's no pre-tensioner, it's actually going to be a lot quicker and easier just to undo this 14mm bolt and swap the belt assembly zone over, leaving the bracket in position. So here's that same bolt, but on the bracket that's still fitted to the car. You can see that with just one bolt to undo with much better access, this is the approach I'm going to take with this side, just to make it so much easier rather than fumbling around with that one and its twin that's buried in by that polystyrene bit. So everything's bolted back, plugged back in with the black security clip repressed, making sure there's no twists in the belt all the way up. This side's much easier to refit because I've previously taken off the cover for the seatbelt height adjuster. but that just clips back in, so it's nice and easy to get a ratchet on here. All tight, all done. Just going to put the trims back and we're finished.